I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the Hybrid Helix trilogy, no other than Mr. JCM Berne.
Hello, Mr. Daniel Lucas. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, welcome back. Another week, another book to discuss.
That's right.
and I'm so excited to talk about your second book of your trilogy, Hybrid Helix.
Thank you. Me too.
What the title of your second book of your trilogy?
So the title is Return of the Griffin, and the so my main character Rohan. We find out in the first book that his sort of code name, his sort of superhero identity, was the Griffin, which is something I stole from a comic I read, 30 years ago. I liked the comic so much, I used the name. Um, and basically he's living off in a space station. He hasn't been back to earth in 10 years, and people come to the station, and earth is under attack and is in danger of being destroyed, and they need help. And so he says, well, they're looking for someone to help them, and the person they're looking for is dead. So he says, well, if that guy can't help, I guess you'll have to settle for me. So he goes back to Earth and tries to, save the human species. So the stakes are a little bit higher than the first book.
Oh, wow. Sounds
Yeah.
interesting. Is that the prologue that you're talking about?
The prologue is, well, I always do this thing in my books with the prologue where not always, but I have in these three. The prologue is a little bit from the end of the book, where you find out sort of where things end up, almost the end, and then it goes back and it says, well, how did we get here? And the rest of the book is telling you basically how we got to that point, and then the ending, which is something you see in TV a lot. Not as much in books, but it does happen. But what I just said is sort of, you can get that from the back of the book, or from the the synopsis, or from the Amazon description. Um, but yeah, so that's the basic setup. Rohan. In book one, in Wistful Ascending, he was all took place on a space station. We never really saw Earth or what had happened to Earth. And in this book, Rohan goes home after 10 years away, and we get some insight into like why he left the planet, what the planet has been like since he left. What has changed, because you know the, it's a world with superheroes and aliens and advanced technology. I couldn't just make the geopolitical scenario the same as it is in our world, because if there were superheroes running around, something would be different. So the you see some of the ramifications of alien technology and how it's changed the world in this setting. And that's part of that's not really the emphasis of the story, but it's in there. And I do a little, because it's a planet where I've said, there's lots of heroes running around. You get to meet a lot of the heroes that he left behind. So I think of it as my a little homage to like the Avengers. I have a lot of characters who are very loosely based on different Marvel characters, um, and but with a twist. So you get to meet a lot of other heroes and spend time with them, and spend time with a planet that's been, changed by alien technology. It's, you know, it's not meant to be very realistic. That was never the point. It's meant to be a little bit of fun and a lot of sort of nods to different comic book things that I liked.
Yes. So Rohan is the Griffin itself.
Yes. So it's the title again. I like my double meaning titles. The Griffin was his name as a superhero and as a soldier, but he doesn't go by that name in his current life, where he's trying to be sort of lead a quiet, mundane life. But it's double the meaning. One meaning is Rohan has to go back. He's returning to Earth, Return of the Griffin. He's going back to Earth to try to save it. The second meaning is he has to sort of reassert his identity as a soldier and as a warrior in order to save the Earth. He has to sort of revert back to that persona that he had as a soldier, um, uh, 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 t- to try to save humanity. So it's a return of that identity to him, as well as him going back to the planet. So double meaning to the title, as I always have.
Wow, sounds interesting again.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Burr, if you define what does Griffin means?
Oh, well, I mean, a griffin is a mythical creature with the head of a lion, no, the head of an eagle and the body of a lion and wings. And there's really nothing particularly Griffin-like about my character, except again, it's he wears a mask in the book. He puts on a mask with like a an eagle beak printed on it. I think I always imagine he just picked the name because he thought it sounded cool, and I picked the name because there was a DC comic about a superhero who is a very similar to mine in many ways. It came out in like the early '90s, and it was called The Griffin, and I was very motivated by it because it was one of the first comics I read that had a guy flying around fighting in space combat against like spaceships and stuff, which is something that I do a lot. And it's not a particularly well known comic. I don't think I've never met anyone else who's like remembered the Griffin. And I don't think it's sold that many copies, but it was very influential on me. So I'm paying a little respect to that old title with the name.
Yes, sounds interesting. Return of the Griffin, how did you crafted it?
Well, how did I craft it? That's a good question. Um, the first book ended, and whenever an author writes a book and they are happy with it and they want to continue the series, you always have a there's a built-in tension. And the first thing you think you want to do, or the first inclination you might have, is to write another book that's very similar to that first book. Make it give it the same setting, bring back the characters people liked, especially if you're getting positive feedback on that first book, which I was. I mean, I didn't sell a ton of copies, but people read it and mostly liked Wistful Ascending, and they were telling me that. They were friends of mine who were telling me that I was getting pretty good reviews. So there's always an inclination to try to, I think, to write a very similar book for the second time. And but there's also a part of you that sort of, first of all, writing a very similar book the second time around is going to be boring, and two, you don't want people who read it to feel ripped off. So you also want to change things and do something new. So you're always torn. How much do I change? How far away do I go from what I did before? I also want to set up some more of the sort of world building, because again, in the first book, you don't really find out much about what had happened to Earth. You don't find out much about the what I have planned for the sort of the villains of the series. They don't really appear in the first book. You don't get any sense of any larger threats that are going to be faced over the course of the series. So I wanted to introduce that, and I wanted to give a little more depth, explore a little more of Rohan's past. But I didn't want to. I don't want to. I don't like flashbacks, and I didn't want to write a prequel story because I don't know. I just always feel like that's cheating. So I decided I'm going to go as far away from the first book as I can. So literally, in terms of geographic distance, went to the other side of the galaxy where Earth is, and left behind most of the characters from the first book, and just hope readers would stick around for the third book where they could see all those characters reunited again.
Yes, Wishful Ascending and Return of the Griffin. Which book is easier for you to write?
Which book was easier to write? That's a good question. I think Wistful Ascending came together better in some ways. Return of the Griffin, I had some good ideas, and I probably had a little more of a struggle with it. Um, the first book's always I find the beginnings are easier. You have all these ideas and you just have to introduce them. In the second book, you have more constraints. You have to you can't re-reveal the secrets from the first book. They're already revealed. I already have all these little, cool little moments in the I mean, I thought they were cool moments in the first book where you first learn something like, oh, you learn this character has a past. Oh, you learn how he feels about something. And when those first introductions are always like, fun, and but then they're done. You've used them. You've given the reader this tidbit of information. So you get to book two, you have to come up with more tidbits of information, but still stay true to the first one. And that was tricky. And it was a lot of characters. Unfortunately, so I think it was I was stuck with an idea. I knew the story I wanted to tell in sort of very broad strokes. I wanted to tell the story of monsters are attacking the earth and the heroes are uniting to defend it. Um, but that's not there are problems with that idea mostly because it just required a lot of characters. If all the heroes of Earth are fighting, that's going to be a lot of heroes. I that was always part of the world building. There were a lot of heroes on Earth, and that just made a lot of characters. And some readers had trouble with just the size of the cast. It's a lot of people to keep track of, and so that made it a little tricky. But yeah, and then I try to give it a more sort of a character development arc that was different from the first book, and the arc that he follows in the second book is a little harder. It's a little more subtle, and it some people really liked it, and some people didn't. I mean, definitely, if you go through the reviews and the feedback, there are definitely people. I've had people say this is their favorite book, but not many. Usually, they don't. Usually not.
Yes. So yes. So are you the writer that is easier for you to name your characters?
Yeah, I don't have any. I rarely have trouble naming my characters. Uh, 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 Once I get a feel for who I want them to be, I usually find it pretty straightforward to name them. I always have fun naming my spaceships. They always have cool names because all the ships in my world, the large spaceships, they're all intelligent. They all have artificial, they all have artificial intelligence. They all have personalities. They speak for themselves, not their captains. So I always have fun, and I always have a relatively easy time coming up with names that represent the personalities of the characters. There are rare exceptions, but I almost always come up with that. I like naming things. I like coming up with titles. I'm a guy on Discord forums when other people say, "What should I name this side character?" And I always chirp in with stuff. I don't know if they're good, but I like doing that.
Yes, very well said, Mr.
Thank
Byrne.
you.
And wishful ascending, how many days and month you wrote this book comparing to the Return of the Griffin?
Oh, that's okay. So the answer is not straightforward. So when I wrote Wistful Ascending, I wrote it relatively quickly, and then the way I did it is I promised myself that when I was done, I was going to publish it on Amazon, whether it was good or not, and that was my promise to myself. And that's how I sort of forced myself to finish it. I promised myself when it was done, it was going up on Amazon, and I committed to that, and I did. And then after it went up, I sort of I realized I didn't know as much about writing as I thought I had, and I started a year long process. I got an editor. Um, I got took a bunch of courses on writing, and I tried to become a better writer. I tried to actually learn how to write after the fact, after releasing the book. So the first time I wrote when I wrote Wistful Ascending, it was much faster than the first time I wrote Return of the Griffin. That first draft came out much quicker, but then I spent a year rewriting it, and for Return of the Griffin, I spent much less time on the rewrite. Um, so first draft, Return of the Griffin was slower, but then the editing and the fixing it up was quicker because I didn't have to. I wasn't trying to take courses and study writing at the same time. I kind of had already done the bulk of that work. So yeah, that's the answer. It was longer and shorter.
So you meant to say wistful ascending is a trial of error of your writing.
Yeah, if you read the book now, I think it's a very good representation of my writing style. But the edition that I first released on Amazon was very the story was the same. Like if you describe the events, they were the same, but every single sentence was rewritten between those versions. Whole, it, I think there's no doubt that you can argue whether the one that's out now is good, but it's definitely better. I promise than the old version. With Return of the Griffin, I did a second edition, but it was very small changes. That was mostly things like typos, a couple awkward sentences, but really not much more than that. Um, but from Wistful Ascending, yeah, I dramatically changed it. So if you read it now, you get a very different version than what people saw in 2020 when that first came out.
So mistake make you perfect in the process.
Well, mistakes. I don't know if mistakes make they perfect practice makes perfect, right? If you are zealous about fixing your mistakes, then they will teach you things. If you just keep repeating them, I don't know that that helps. So that's the trick. You've got to zealously pursue your mistakes and try to get rid of them, which is what I
Yes.
do. You know, at least with writing.
Yes, people, you need to learn from your mistake. It's not just
Yes,
over and over and over.
absolutely, absolutely.
Return of the Griffin. Do you think the style of writing on the Wistful Ascending is the same?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I have, I have a theory about this that there are writers who can write in many different styles, who can adapt their styles to from book to book and make them feel different, make the character, make the dialogue sound different, and that's a wonderful skill to have. And I don't have it. I have one voice when I write, and uh, uh, you know, I have a sense of humor, and it's what it is. And if people, I'm certainly not going to say everyone loves it. I mean, some people like it, some people don't. That's fine. But I don't have the kind of craft to write in a different style. And there are authors who do, and I admire them. But I've tried and I can't do it. So I can only write with one, and it's very recognizable. If you read anything I've written, it sounds like everything else I've ever. I mean, the style is very distinct, and I can't change it. I'm thinking of like an author like Stephen Brust, who's a fantasy writer that I really like, and he's written whole series that have a completely different style and voice from other whole series he's written, and it amazes me every time I read them that the same guy wrote these two completely different styles of book. I can't do that, so the style is the same, and
So,
the tone is the same, right? The level of humor, how serious, how dark it is. I was very, I knew when I started writing these books exactly what tone I was looking for. Again, in terms of how dark, how funny, how emotional I wanted it to be, and I definitely have been consistent with that. Like I've stuck to my tone. Again, not saying it's good. I mean, someone may or may not like it, but if you like one book, I think you'll appreciate the others more or less the same.
so do you think in the future you go outside for your comfort zone and write another genre
No,
except for fantasy?
probably not. Or if I do, it'll sound a lot like my, like I have toyed with the idea of writing like a story about some of these characters, about like sort of what happens after they retire, and sort of like a almost like a cozy story about them just running a diner somewhere. Same characters, not running into any world-threatening problems, just like running a diner and running into normal diner type problems. And I might do that one day, but if I did, the tone would be the same as the sort of lighter moments in the books I already have out. Because there are lighter moments there. I have scenes where they're sitting around drinking, characters sitting around drinking coffee and having a good time. That's already there. I might just make that the whole book. And I don't know if I'll ever actually do that. I've toyed with the idea. I have a plot for a book like that in my mind. It's something I might do one day. I haven't really committed to it, but there's no serious plan, and I highly doubt I would do a really um I mean, that would still be, I guess, a science fiction book, right? If it was if a retired superhero in a diner having a romance, it's still a superhero story. So it's possible I'll do that, but it's not really something I'm eager to jump into.
Yes. So, are you the writer that you plan first your story, then go to the depth of your story?
Yeah, I always have a pretty detailed outline before I start. I know what's going to happen for the most part, and I think with most planners, as you go, you think of things and you make changes and adjustments. But for the most part, when I started this book, I pretty much knew how it was going to end, and I knew how the middle was going to go, and I had most of the details worked out. Um, and that's still true. I'm on book 4 in the series I'm writing right now, and the same thing. I have a very detailed outline. I know what's going to happen. I just have to get it on paper.
Yes, before we go on, Mr. Byrne, I want to shout out to the people listening in the United
Mm.
States, most especially in the states of New York. And I have a lot of places listening to my podcast. And in New York, I got 21%, the Bronx at 20%, Brooklyn at 8%, Coram, Seville, Deer Park, Yonkers, Liverpool, Queens, Rochelle, Wisbury, Levittown, Forest Hill, Larchmont, Long Beach, Rome. Oh, you have Rome in New York. Jamaica,
Hmm.
Del Mar, Rochester, Chanectady, Norwich, Ticonderoga, Buffalo,
Ticonderoga.
Ridgewood, Woodside, Penium, Port Washington, Peekskill, St. Johnsville, yeah, Massapequa, State Island, Bayville, Valley Stream, Elmont, Stratogo Spring, Freeport, Mastic, West Chazy, or Chazy, yeah, Syracuse,
Yep.
Brewster, Brentwood, Hamilton, Batavia, Plantsville, Katona, Lacus Valley, Geneva, Hopewell Junction, James Wood, Fairport, and no one more, Webster, and last but not
Hmm.
the least, Hicksville. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, just like Mr. JCM Byrne.
I'm about 5 minutes from New Rochelle, and I've been to most. I've been to most of the places you've named. I'm a New Yorker, born and raised. So
Oh,
I've been to most of those.
wow.
I grew up in the city, and I went to college up in Buffalo. So I've been back and forth across the state many
Oh,
times.
oh my goodness, I was so surprised. That's according to my analytics. So thank you, New York, for listening to my podcast.
Yeah, it's great.
So, Mr. Byrne, can you tell us the main character of the Return of the Griffin?
Yeah, the main character is just like in the first book, and all the whole series is Rohan, and he's the Griffin. Also, it's a sort of his code name, like Clark Kent and Superman, right? The same idea. And he's a hybrid, which is where the series gets its name from. Which he's part alien, and his that heritage gives him, some extraordinary powers. Again, it's a lot like Superman or the comic Invincible, if you're familiar with that, or there's a lot of comics with this, that same sort of rough background. And yeah, it's Rohan. So he's
It's it's you say the Rohan, the mighty man. You can do
yes.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you want to get a good look at him, the cover of this book, which is I love the cover of this book, I have to say, which is Rohan with a giant shark behind him, because that is the threat in the novel.
Oh wow, Mr. Byrne, you just combine Rohan and the Meg.
Yep, yep, that's exactly
Right?
right. It's
Oh my
exactly right.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yes, we feature the author of Meg, I think last month,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, it's a phenomenal with my co-host Chris Tetrablay because one of his favorite author, he influenced him in writing all his trilogy.
Oh,
And
that's fantastic.
yes, so Return of the Griffin, what is the best highlight?
Well, I mean, you can always pick the climactic, the battle against the sharks, where they save the planet. But probably the highlight would be there's a fight early on where there are you know there's a this takes place actually right near Wistful, right near where the first book took place. Before Rohan leaves to go to Earth, he has so the Wistful orbits a planet that's full of giant monsters, and some people have convinced themselves that there is a treasure on the planet. So they people keep trying to sneak onto the planet to get the treasures, the archaeological sites. They try to dig up things that they think will make them rich, and of course, the monsters come and try to kill them because that's what monsters do. And Rohan has to save them. And he's very annoyed by this because these people aren't supposed to be on the planet at all. And he's got to save them because he doesn't want to just let them die. So that's sort of the opening action sequence of the book. That's the first chapter is people have gone to onto the planet to try to find their fortune, and they're about to get eaten, and Rohan has to protect them from themselves. And I would say that's probably the best written scene. I think maybe I don't know. I don't really think of things that way as about highlights. I just and the other highlights. I think there are some scenes that are a lot of fun, but they're spoilers. So if I tell you about them, they won't have the same impact to the readers.
Yes.
Uh, because there's some surprises in the book. There's some characters you meet where you don't know who they are, and then you find out who they are. And I think those are fun scenes, but I can't tell you what makes them fun because it would ruin it. So
Yes.
yeah,
No spoiler.
no spoilers.
So
We don't do that.
what are the elements that you put in your story that make the readers glued to it?
I don't know. Are they glued? I hope they are. People talk. Well, I can tell you what people say. People feedback. Well, there's a decent amount of action. There's a lot of action scenes. If you like that, not everyone does. I think many people relate to the characters. The Rohan himself is a relatable character. He's a guy who regrets a lot of things from his past and is trying to do better. And I think a lot of adults, or most adults, or all adults, can empathize with that to a certain extent. We all, I think if you're a certain age, you always can look back and regret some of the things you did when you were younger, and you maybe did some foolish things or some mean things at some point. You can look back and say, I'm going to try to maybe make up for it or do better than that. And so that's relatable to a lot of readers. um, I think well, I'll say this: there's a lot of humor in the book, and if you're the sort of person who thinks I'm funny, then you'll appreciate that. And if you don't, you shouldn't read them because you're not gonna have a good time. You're gonna get through a book, and you're. I actually had one reviewer said too much humor in this book, but it was good otherwise, and I was like, oh man, don't read book two because the humor doesn't go away. I keep making jokes because that's what I do. I can't write without making jokes. I get bored. I've tried to write very serious fiction where there's no humor or very little humor, and I can't do it. I get bored. So
So do you think humor is one of your character to impress your reader?
Yeah, the humor and the action, and then I try to put a lot of things in there to draw in because different readers appreciate different things. So there's a lot of mystery to the universe that is unfolding little by little. So that you get the sense in this book that there's creatures that are species that have been fighting for millions of years or hundreds of millions of years. You get a sort of a sense about the backstory, maybe where the hybrids came from, um, some why there are so many aliens that can eat the same food and can breathe the same air, how that happened. So you start getting these little pieces of the puzzle through these two books. And again, there are readers who don't care, and that's fine. There are readers who don't care about that sort of deep world building, but some people really do. And I think I'm trying to give different people different sorts of things. And if you just want to read it and look and for the jokes and for the action, I think you'll have a good time. But if you want to read it for the deep history and the like world building, I think you'll have a good time with that too. And if you want to read it for the philosophy and the investigation of the nature of like moral questions, how do we make up for misdeeds from our past? I think you'll have a good time with that also. So I try to give a lot of different things because I know not everyone likes exactly like the same notes in the things they read, and I'm hoping to attract a lot of different readers.
Yes, definitely. And according to Mr. Richard P. Jasper, more action. So if you compare Wishful Ascending, is this less action on the first book?
I don't know. I'd have to actually count pages. I think. I don't know if it's less action. I think it's very close to the same. Um, there's there's definitely more political commentary in this book because I have a somewhat satirical take on contemporary American politics, which wasn't in the first book because the first book didn't take place on Earth at all. So there was none of that, and I put some of it in here, and I think you definitely find some reviewers felt uncomfortable with that aspect of it, that I had felt that I had done too much, but I didn't feel I could write a book about alien superheroes defending the Earth without acknowledging the current political climate, like in the States, for example, where people have very strong feelings about immigrants from other countries. I can only extrapolate and imagine they'd have even stronger feelings about immigrants from other planets taking leadership roles, and people would react to that. And I couldn't just ignore that, so I stuck some of that in the book.
Yes, and according to M. Alvarez, edge of your seat fun. Oh, I love this. It's just like you're watching movie. Like, oh my goodness, I want to see this in a movie on a series. Don't you think,
Yeah,
Mr. Byrne?
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. As soon as Bollywood can call me and arrange for some production team to come and adapt this, I think that'd be fantastic.
Yes,
But I'm not going to hold my breath.
definitely. So why you like Bollywood and Hollywood?
I'm a huge well, first of all, my main character is of Indian descent, so he has to be played by an Indian actor. Um, and I'm a big fan of Bollywood movies. That's a big reason I made the character of Indian descent, because sort of a little paying a little homage to Bollywood movies that I love so much, or Tollywood movies that I love so much. And I think if you've watched a movie like RRR or Bahubali or some of the action movies coming out of southern India, I just love the scope and the way they're framed and the you know in a lot of Indian action movies have a very sort of over the top feeling to not all but many of them over the top action that I think would go really well with a superhero story. And there've been a number of movies made in India. I mean, that's how I got into Bollywood was watching a superhero movie on Netflix called Krish with Hrithik Roshan. And that's how I got hooked on Bollywood movies. So there's a strong history of that being done. So my dream has always been to have the hybrid helix adapted by Indian filmmakers. Again, I don't really think that's ever going to happen, but I I
Oh,
wouldn't I wouldn't turn down the phone call.
yes. This always pessimistic, Mr. Byrne.
Yeah, yeah.
Crossing my finger.
Thank
One
you.
of these days.
One of these days,
Who knows, right?
I can dream. I can
uh,
dream. Yes,
Dream big, as they said.
yes, yes, yes.
And according to Bo,
Oh, yes.
if you love the space operas, you will love this series. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I think space opera is probably the best way to describe the genre of these books. They're science fiction, but they're more adventure, and they're not really about a realistic understanding of scientific advancement or what technology. It's much more of a fun story, like a Star Wars or uh, like a lot of space operas that I grew up on. Like I can think of books that are sort of similar. Deathstalker, which was another old series by Simon Green that I was influenced by. But yeah, space opera. That's the best way to describe it.
Yes, and according to Ian Blumenfield, a great and very busy. Oh wow, I love this too. How busy it is, the story, Mr. Byrne.
Yeah, it's busy. There are a lot of characters. Like I said, I was trying to, a little bit like the Avengers. So there's a lot of characters who are named briefly, and then we find out they're dead. So the problem is when you name a lot of characters for readers, it's often tricky because you feel like if you read the name, you need to remember who they are. The name seems important. So looking back, maybe I shouldn't have had so many named characters, especially ones you didn't need to know, you didn't need to remember. But it was kind of fun to put in little references to to superheroes from Marvel Comics or DC Comics. So you know, I did it.
You did it.
I did it.
So, what are the elements did you put in the story that lessen the repetitiveness of the story?
Well, I avoided being repetitive mostly by just doing nothing I did in the first book. Again, I took the character and I moved him away from the place where the first book took place, took him away from all the friends he made in the first book, pretty much, and introduced him to a whole new set of backup characters. And maybe I overdid it, if anything, because it's maybe I should have had some more repetition and not less. But that was my method, and then what's interesting is, if you compare it to like book three, he's back on the station and back with the people we grew to know in book one. Um, so I like this back and forth. And then in book four, we're going to see both. We're going to see characters from Earth and from space. So that's where it's always I always go back to the notion of a helix. A helix is like the shape. It doesn't just go up or across, right? It's a spiral. It goes forward and it kind of goes back, and you kind of end up right above where you started if you follow a helix with your finger, and then you go away again and you come back and you're again right above where you started, but a little higher. So you're always kind of meandering, but making slow progress towards something. And that's the narrative structure of the series as well as the name of the series.
Wow, very well said, Mr.
Thank you.
Burns. According to Sam, waiting for this one is from Germany. So, what is the intervals of the first book to the second book?
Well, okay. So the first book was released first at the end of 2020. I want to say September, October. Actually, I don't remember. And then I spent most of 2021, like I said, learning how to write and rewriting it, and released a bitter version towards the end of 2021. And then this book came out in the winter of 2022. So February, end of February 2022. This book. So this book came out more than a year after the first book, but only a few, maybe 5 or 6 months after the second edition of the first book. And then from this to book three was another, oh geez, I guess it was another 8 months. Another eight
Oh,
months. And it's going to be at least another eight, no, more than 8 months, probably 9 or 10 months to the next book. So I'd like to keep up a faster pace. But between books three and four, I wrote another book that's not in this series. And that took up some time because I had an idea and I wanted to get it on paper. And then there's a gap between book one and two just because I was, like I said, I took time out to really try to find an editor and learn how to write. So that took a lot of time. But I've been hoping to try to get out 2 books a year, but so far I've been falling a little short of that. But it's hard, I have a day job.
yes,
And
true.
and a family, and I have responsibilities beyond just writing these books. Although that if I could write full time, I'm sure I could get out two or three a year. But that's not going to happen.
If after 10 years and you want to go back to revise both of your books, Wishful Ascending and Return of the Griffin,
Yeah.
which part of or which chapter you want to revise?
Uh with the first book, I would revise the prologue, which I was never quite happy with. It was only 1,500 words, never quite had the structure I'd like. With this book, I probably rewrite some of the there's a subplot where um, the main character is being confronted by people who he had hurt as a young man on Earth, a decade earlier, and I never loved the way that storyline resolved. So I probably try to find a better way to make that work. But I also didn't hate the way that storyline was. I don't hate that storyline either. So I don't know if I could do a much better job with it. I mean, I'm not saying someone else couldn't, but I don't know that I would ever be able to really make it that much better. It's not something I'm going to overly think about. It's not. I'm not planning to rewrite these. I mean, I may go back at some point and rewrite, clean up some of the language. I'm sure there's still a couple typos. I'm sure there's still some sentences that are awkward, some, repeated words, things like that. You can always fix and improve as you get better at writing. But those are really small changes.
Yes, and before we go on, Mr. Byrne, I'm
Yes.
inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third
Yes.
season with Chef Alessandro, one
Right.
of the executive chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen, Food 101.
Absolutely.
Return of the Griffin. What else you can say about it?
People should buy it, but they should only buy it after they buy and read Wistful Ascending, because otherwise it won't make much sense. And yeah, and it's if you like your some superhero action, you like giant monsters, and you like some humor, and you like a hero who's may screw up but is always trying to do the right thing. This is might be the book for you. And there's only one way to find out, and it's free on Kindle Unlimited. And there's no audiobook. I'll say that. There's an audiobook to Wistful Ascending, but I have not yet commissioned an audiobook for the second book. My, just haven't had the money yet. Hopefully, sometime this year, I'll get an audiobook made of this book, but there are no concrete plans for that as yet. So I know a lot of people like audiobooks, and I would like to accommodate them, but I have not been able to so far.
Yes, let's support Mr. Byrne so that the book that is producing is more and more become more excellent or the
Thank you.
best. And of course, phenomenal. So,
Speaking my language.
yes, Mr. Byrne, all your novel can be standalone or it should prerequisite for the first book.
I think you'd want to read them in order. These three are I've had people read the third book. For example, I had a friend um, who beta read it, and she's trying to help me out by reading it and um, give me some feedback. So he hadn't read the first two, uh, and he actually enjoyed it. But I think you'll get a lot more out of them if you read them in order. Um, there's character development from book to book. There's things that I kind of assume you understand when I write book two because I assume you've read book one. They're not really meant to be. They're standalones in the sense that each one has a complete story. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They end. You don't leave, the first book doesn't end on a cliffhanger. That's not how it's structured. But if you're going to read them, read the first one. Read Wistful Ascending first, and then if you like it, you can read the second one. But I wouldn't start anywhere other than the beginning.
Because there's a connection that's missing.
There's definitely a continuing story, and there are characters they'll mention in book two who you had met in book one. You're not going to understand, if there's some characters pining after their ex girlfriend, and you didn't read the part where they had a girlfriend. It's not going to make sense. So it's all going to make much more sense if you read them in order. So that's what I highly recommend. I've had a couple people break that. I've had one person she liked book one. She didn't want to read a book about Earth, so she skipped book two, read book three, and then she liked it and wanted to go back and read book two in the middle at the end. And that's fine. You can do that, but it's a little difficult.
Yes.
So,
So do you think Hybrid Helix is expandable series until 10, 25 series?
oh yeah, my very loose plan is to go for 20, 25 books. I have a long term goal. I know uh, uh, I have specific character development arc I want for Rohan. I want him to change his attitudes about very specific things in specific ways over a long period of time, because I think that that's how people grow and change. It really does happen over a long period of time. So I have a long-term plan in mind, and every book makes strides towards that long-term goal. So yeah, I'm planning 20, 25 books, and hopefully I probably should get a little more exercise and drink a little bit less tequila so I live long enough to finish it. But
Yes.
but that is but that is the plan.
Yes, healthy living, people.
Yes, healthy living.
So let's do the recap of book one and book two, Mr. Byrne.
A recap of book one.
Yes.
Book one, Rohan is living on Wistful. He's towing ships. Um, a wormhole opens up, and a ship full of refugees comes through, and that draws the attention of the empire that rules the galaxy. And spies and scientists all converge on this sleepy station, and some of them know things about Rohan's past that he didn't want exposed, and things escalate from there, and he has to deal with all the problems that come with that, and try to find a way to protect all of his friends uh, without being so violent that he scares them off. So that's Wistful Ascending in a nutshell.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Byrne.
Thank you.
And how about for the return of the Griffin?
Return the Griffin is a little more straightforward. Rohan is again on Wistful, trying to live a quiet life, and people he knew on Earth come and visit and say Earth is in danger, and they're looking for Hyperion. Hyperion is sort of the most powerful hero from Earth, who had left Earth with Rohan, had been Rohan's mentor, had helped him survive, years of war all across the galaxy. Hyperion is a hero known across the galaxy as the epitome of strength and justice. And they're looking for Hyperion to bring back to Earth to save the planet. There's only one problem. Hyperion's dead, and he's been dead for 2 years, and Rohan was there when he died. So, in, without Hyperion there to save them, Rohan's got to go and try to take his place. And he doesn't feel very comfortable doing that, but he doesn't have a choice.
Sounds interesting, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you.
So if you compare your trilogy to a science fiction movie, which one?
Avengers.
Yes, people, see, imagine the the scene of Avenger. That's how better than Avenger. Do you think?
It's, I, I don't know. We'd have to film it and find out from watching the films.
Crossing my finger that
Thank
this
you.
is better than the Avenger. And thank you, Player FM, for being on the top five best review podcast. Thank you so much. I always on the top 10 list, now on the top five. Thank you so much for
Nice.
supporting this podcast. So, Mr. Byrne, once again, invite our listeners to buy all your books.
Okay, well, please, listeners, go to Amazon, type in JCM Burn, and look at Wistful Setting. It's free on Kindle Unlimited. It's only 99 cents for the ebook, and see if you like it. And if you do, please continue the series. And if you don't, I hope you find other fantastic books that you love.
Yes, let's support all the writers all over the world because we need to empower them to share their talents like Mr. Byrne. Yes, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel Lucas. I appreciate your invitation and hosting the show, and you do a great job with this podcast.
Thank you. And more to come, people. See you soon.